Welcome to The Human Variable. I'm your host, Divya. This is a space where we explore the inner patterns that shape how we show up within ourselves, how we relate and collaborate in teams, how we navigate dynamics in groups and families, how we lead and influence in organizations, and how all of this ripples outwards into our communities. Each episode, we take one human variable, one pattern that makes our behavior so complex and so fascinating, and explore it through research, lived experience, and conversations with people who work closely with human behavior. Because being human is complex, and we're all still learning. In episode 2 of the Human Variable Family Business series, I speak with Cathy Carroll, a family business coach and an author of the book Hug of War, Leading a Family Business with Love and Logic. Cathy brings her lived experience as a next-gen who stepped into her father's company after a long corporate career, and the clarity she gained from choosing to step away. We talk about the identity questions that surface when next-gens enter the business, the different hats they wear, and the pressure many feel to prove themselves. Cathy also shares a framework for conflict, discussing the kinds of conflict, and about how families can choose to engage more constructively. This episode is for next-gens navigating the tension between proving themselves and finding their voice, and for family business leaders who want to understand and acknowledge the deeper identity and conflict patterns shaping the next generation. Hello, everyone. Pleasure to have Cathy Carroll with us today. Cathy Carroll comes from a long line of entrepreneurs, a grandfather who led a Fortune 500 business, a father who built his own company, and her childhood was shaped by this world. But unlike many next-gens, she chose a different path first, 20 years in the corporate career at United Airlines. Eventually, life pulled her back. She learned firsthand to lead in this landscape of family business. And then she made a choice, which almost next-gens do not talk about openly. She chose not to work with her father. And that decision also maybe helped her forge a path to what she does today. Welcome, Cathy. She's the founder of Legacy Onward, where she supports family business leaders around the world. And she's also an author of the book Hug of War, an invaluable resource for anyone navigating family business leadership. Cathy, really great to have you here today with us.
So happy to be with you, Divya.
Firstly, I just want to jump in. I mean, a lot of us in the next gen experience complex. So I just want to hear about how yours was.
Complex to say the least. Yeah. Well, after 20 years at United, I got a phone call from a recruiter, and the recruiter said, "What do you know about the rodeo industry?" And I said, "Not much." And it took me a short bit to realize I was getting recruited for my father's open position, which was president and chief operating officer of his companies. And I was very ambivalent. I was very ambivalent about whether to take the role. On the professional side, I was excited about the leadership challenge. I was looking for a bigger leadership role, and I was a mid-level executive at United. But I am a woman from Chicago, didn't have a rodeo background. I had a service background, and I was the daughter of the owner. And this was my first rodeo. So I didn't really have the credibility that I thought I would need in the space. And on the personal side, I was very excited about being the hero to the family because the companies were struggling. They needed my father needed someone to come in and turn them around. And I liked the idea of being the hero to the family, right? And then the idea of working for my father was very unappealing. I didn't have an historically warm relationship with him. So I was reluctant to make myself both financially and emotionally vulnerable. But after going through all the paces that the recruiter put me through, and after discussing it at length with the people closest to me, I decided to take the role. And I'm glad I did. Strangely enough, my father paid the recruiter $75,000 to hire me.
Oh my God.
And it was like
This is ages ago.
Yeah. It was sort of a Dickensian best of times, worst of times. Loved the people, loved the industry, loved the work. It was a real treat to be a part of that community for the time that I was there, almost 3 years. And working for my father was really challenging. And every time the phone rang, I would sort of bristle and wonder what he wanted. And every time an email came in, I would sort of roll my eyes, which was because I had a story in my head that my father wasn't a business person and that I was going to be the one to save the business. So there came an inflection point. There's a much longer story, and you're welcome to double click on that. But there came an inflection point and I realized I needed to leave. So I left. And after a long period of self reflection, I came upon two ahas. The first was that I think as I succeeded as a leader, I disrupted something far more important to my father than profits. And that is that I got between him and his cowboy friends because he was in this industry for the people. He had actually become a part of the rodeo community about 35 years ago when my parents divorced, and everyone in our hometown sided with my mom. So he lost his family, his friends, even his parents sided with my mom. And fast forward now, and I think that challenged his relevance and his identity. And it brought back all the drama of the divorce when his friends sided with his wife and now they were siding with his children, with his daughter. So that was aha number one. And aha number two took me, I'll confess, a lot longer to recognize that my ego was in the front seat and I really was not a good partner with the owner of the business. I was on a mission to prove that my leadership style was right and his was wrong. And here's a little bit more about his leadership style and my leadership style. He loves to spend. If he buys one truck, he'll buy 4 trucks. And I was built on the earth to save. It's like I've saved every penny I've ever earned. My father loves to disrupt. If there's anything that's flowing smoothly, he will flip the table and turn things upside down. And I was like put on this earth to stabilize, put in process and structure, which worked well as a chief operating officer, right? And then my father is a very command and control kind of leader, which I didn't like as a kid. I didn't like his spending. I didn't like his disruption as a kid. I didn't like his domineering father behavior. So I developed an identity as a servant leader. And I was convinced that my leadership style was right and his was wrong. But I only saw half the picture as now that you can't save your way to profitability, right? I could have run a very smooth run, beautiful organization that was complacent and got outperformed by the competition. And as much as I like servant leadership, there is a time and a place for command and control. Like if we were in the same room and you got, or bike riding and you got hit by a car, I'm not going to gather a crowd and decide as a group what we're going to do next. I'm going to scream you for you CPR, right? So it took me a long time to realize that I was not the best partner to my father. He still owns the business today at 87 years old. And it took me a while to realize that my ego was really in the driver's seat and not, I was not my best self. But hey, lesson learned. And you're right. It did lead me to the path that I'm on. I decided, I was in my mid 40s at the time. This was back in 2011. And I said, gosh, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I said, I want to be a coach, but I didn't know what that was. So I went to training to become an executive coach. And I realized, wow, coaching is not what I thought it was. Two, I really could have used a coach when I was working for my father. And frankly, I'm not sure my father's that coachable, but my grandfather 2 generations ago, if he had had a coach, we could have had a really different life outcome. And 3, I looked at my life and I realized, oh, this is what I meant to do. I am meant to bring coaching to family enterprises, and I've never turned back.
Sure. Thank you so much for sharing that so honestly and vividly. A couple of things I want to sort of zoom in there. The aha moment that you spoke of, where you realized your ego was coming in the way, that took you a while, and maybe when you were not a part of it, right? So, and a lot of our next gens are also in that place because next gens really don't want the control. They want to be seen. They've done something credible in the past. But like you were mentioning your own story, it's sometimes becomes about proving themselves and earning that credibility. So, how did you come to that place, or what is actually going to help these next gens when they're in that position?
Yeah. I love your emphasis on identity because that's plays such a big role in the family business space. And one of the first moments that can be really helpful when a next gen is stepping into a family business is actually to work outside of the family business for a period of time, a minimum of 2 years. Some family employment policies are as long as 5. But helping to establish and form your self-confidence, your self-esteem, and your self-worth as a professional outside of the family business can really help you enter a family business with a lot more authentic confidence because you've succeeded outside of the fishbowl. Like when you're in the family business, it's really hard to know if the feedback you're getting, if you're getting feedback at all, is honest because a lot of people fear speaking truth to power. And even if you're 22 years old and you have no power. If you're the child of the owner, of course you have power, right? You have a direct line to the CEO. And therefore, people's livelihoods are at risk by speaking their truth. if they don't feel like it's a safe place where they can be honest. So, because that's a natural human tendency by non-family professionals, it can be really helpful to earn that self-esteem outside for a while before you come inside. I've also heard some consultants, I'm not a consultant, but a lot of consultants will advise next gens to enter the business at a
Mhm.
level below where they actually are capable of performing so that they get some quick wins and they can focus on building relationships and getting to know the culture and getting to know the people before they have to really task themselves with building new business skills. And I think it's a clever idea. I've seen it work that way and I've seen it work other ways, but those can be two really helpful entry points. And then when you're in the family business, and of course you're trying to prove yourself to be good enough, stop trying so hard. Just be you, right? Just trust that what you're, I mean, try hard, like work hard at your job, but don't try so hard to prove anything. Because what often happens is the harder you work to manage and establish a certain image, the more people will see the ego that's in front. And that's not always going to be in service to your credibility as a leader or successor leader in the family business.
So that's a great advice for our next gen. Stop trying to prove yourself. Just work hard and you'll find your way out. It's lovely when I look at your story, and a lot of our next gens are also there. There's this phase of I don't want to work in the family business. And then of course life made you find a way into it. And then you again decided you don't want to be in there. So there's a lot of coming back, going in, trying to negotiate and all of that. And of course, research, Davis Hampton, Landsberg's research emphasizes on how identity, especially the next gen identity, isn't linear, right? It's iterative. It's a lot of circling back, renegotiation, and making these new choices in the dynamic system of family. So,
Yeah.
and your journey reflects beautifully too. How exactly did you navigate through this?
For me, because I had so much experience, I had 20 years outside of the family business before I worked for my father. And I had genuine confidence. I was a high potential at all the organizations that I worked for. So I felt confident in my business capacities. And so I didn't have that same identity reformation that happens when you enter at a younger level, because I think the research does show, and I love that it's demonstrated to be iterative, because when you come in at 22, you're a different person than when you're 32, and you're a different person than when you're 42. And so
Right.
as we as human beings continue to develop, we're continuing to demonstrate new capacities. We're continuing to take risks. We're continuing to build relationships. And sometimes the hardest people to convince that you're growing up and maturing are the people who are closest to you, your family members, right? Because they have a image of who you are. You're always the one who does X, or you're always the peacemaker, or you're always the troublemaker, or whatever it is. And so even if we have done the work of our own growth and self-development, it sometimes takes some extra effort with the family members to rebrand within the family. So for me, when I decided to leave my family's business, wasn't a big fear, because I was ready to place bets on me. I had confidence. In fact, I was at the point where I was so ready to place a bet on me that I was like, I don't think I want to work for anyone ever again. I'm going to take a chance on me because I have built confidence and I trust myself enough to do so.
So that clarity really helps.
I mean, it was still risky. It was scary,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And when you start anything new, it takes a while before you can actually earn anything decent, typically. But yeah, I'm glad I did it.
And while we zoom out of your story, Kathy, I just want to emphasize on of how your story is not happening in isolation. A recent article in The Economist points out about the succession crisis that's coming. And it looks like the structures are ready, but people aren't. There's trillions of dollars we should be moving from the founders to the next generation. And the technical side is documented, but the emotional side does not get that much of emphasis. So I want to bring that into context with one of a case that came up in some of the confidential interviews that I was conducting as a part of my research. So here, the founder had built a business from nothing. He remained at the center of things for his entire life. And for him, when succession came in, it was not just one event, right? It was almost like this identity transition. And all the questions that came up were about who am I without the business? Am I going to be relevant? I don't want to feel retired. What is my daily life going to look like? So succession was a big thing. And on the other side, you have the next generation who are in their 40s or 50s and they've built their own careers outside, are credible, they have their children, and they're looking at it as, will I ever get to lead the business? Just want to ask you, what do you think about this?
Well, you have just nailed the gnarliest challenge in family business. I mean, it is such a meme that the leading generation can't let go. It's ridiculous. In fact, there's a client that I'm working with now that I think is worth sharing because it's such a great example of this. And I'll share a little bit about what recently it transpired in our conversations. There's a father-son team that I've been working with for, I'm ashamed to say, probably on and off for 8 years. I used to meet with them when I lived in Chicago, but when I moved to Texas now, I only see them when I'm in town.
Sure.
And the father said, I would like to transition this business to my son in about 5 years. So I'd like you to work with him on building his skills and his capacity to lead. And terrific. So off we went and been working with the son, and he's actually making good progress. He's a human being, so he has more to grow. And as I continue to speak with the father says, he's not ready. He's not ready. And the son says, I am desperate for more challenge. Like, I have got this job roped. I'm ready to take on more. And I want feedback from my father about what I need to do to improve. And the father won't give the feedback. He'll kind of try to give it surreptitiously through his assistant or through other leaders in the organization, but he won't have the direct conversation with his son. So here we are 8 years later. And I said to the leader, to the dad, remember when we first met and you said you'd like to transfer this business to your son in 5 years? Well, we are at the 8-year point. And every time I talk to you, you say, he's not ready. He's not ready. And you're not helping him get ready. You're not challenging him. You're not pushing him to grow. In fact, you're holding back all of your assessments with him. You're not giving him the feedback that he needs to hear to grow into the leader that you want. And I said, and on the other side of it, you're not doing the work that you need to do to develop an identity outside of the leader of this business. And that
Wow,
really
how did that land?
hit hard. It hit really hard. And of course, I shared it gently and lightly, and I said, what do you make of it? And things like that. But what was particularly hard for him to hear about that is that he's a third generation leader. His son is the fourth generation. And he had an incredibly painful transition from his father to him. His father wouldn't let go. And his father was in a really significant health decline. So by the time the father was unable to lead and the son, who's now the dad that I was talking about, was able to step in, the business had really deteriorated and he had to work his tail off to turn that company around. And now he's turned this company around. It's wildly successful. And it's almost like he's repeating the same pattern that happened to him a generation later. Now his health is strong and he continues to thrive. But I think that's what really hit him, is that he's starting to recognize that he's repeating the pattern that his father did with him. So that's been particularly interesting. But the part of the story that I want to share now is I met with them literally 2 weeks ago. And I said, we really need to have a group meeting because I keep hearing these things from each one of you and you need to have this conversation. I'm happy to be the facilitator. And what emerged in the conversation was that they were both really terrified to speak their truth to each other because they didn't want to disrupt the family relationship. They had a really warm father-son relationship. And whenever they got crossways business-wise, it would explode and escalate, and then they would run to their corners, and it would really disrupt the father-son relationship. So they hadn't found the ability to actually engage in constructive business conversations and developmental conversations without getting reactive and exploding. And for the first time, they were actually able to do it. And I am excited to say that I'm flying back to Chicago in a couple of weeks, and we're going to have another conversation because they're starting to build their skills and their confidence in speaking truth to each other so that they can continue to have these conversations. Because the dad he truly does have an identity outside of the family business, and there's more work there to be done, but he has really developed a good amount of identity outside of it, and he is ready to transition. I think he's finally willing to engage in these conversations because he sees the need for him to transition. So it's a great question. I wish there were a silver bullet to the answer. And then there's one more thing I'll say is, in my experience working with leaders who are in the succession question, or some like to say business continuity question, there are a couple of things at play that I think are worth mentioning. One, you described it really well. Work is the center of my life, is the way I think you described the father saying that. And as long as the work is the center of his life and he has no identity outside of that, he can't let go of the trapeze pole until he's got a new trapeze bar, maybe bar is the better word, to grab onto, and he's got nothing to grab onto, right? But so often that identity piece is subconscious. It's unknown. If someone said, you don't have an identity outside, yes, I do. I have plenty of identity. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of reflection, and it's a process. It's not a snapshot in time. And what I hear when the dad says, I want to be relevant. I don't want to be retired. I want to hear a lot of really tender, raw, vulnerable emotions coming up for him that are about him and that aren't considering the bigger system. If you think about it in the context of what's in service to the business, what's in service to the family, yes, your needs, your emotions, your rawness, it's real. It is real, and get support, hire a therapist, hire a coach, work through the process of grieving the loss that you are going to have. You are going to have a loss. Start preparing for that. And if you only care about yourself, which is fine, you're entitled. If you only care about yourself, then fine, don't. And all the other people are going to suffer as a result. But if you don't care, that's okay. It's a tough message, but if what matters to you is the bigger system and the other people, think about their needs as well as your own. Don't just focus on your own.
Right. And as you were mentioning that, you were mentioning about how the founder generation has had his fears and the next gen had his fears, right? For one, it's about what's my identity, what's outside of this. And for the next gen, it's about, am I credible? I'm ready for the challenge, but it isn't coming. How do you address these fears even?
Well, my favorite way is to just acknowledge them. Just acknowledge that they are real and sit with them. It's being with the discomfort of our emotions is very, very unpleasant, but that's the work of humanity, right? That's the work of growth. That's the work of development. And that's part of being a leader. Not every leader is 100% confident all the time. In fact, I would probably argue that almost every leader has doubts, unless, well, we won't go there, but every leader has doubts, right? And
Right.
so that's okay. That's normal. What's uniquely challenging in a family business is, let's say a family business grows to 10 million and then the next leader steps in and the next leader grows it from 10 million to 100 million. And then the next generation, it goes from 100 million to 10 billion. Your succession process is going to a different organization, right? So the challenges of leadership at a $10 million organization are going to be different than 100 million. And so, these later generation successors are inheriting a far more complex organization than their predecessors did, which makes it totally relevant and legitimate to have the concerns. Am I capable of being the leader? Do I have what it takes? Those are great questions. Sit with those questions and just be with the questions while you're continuing to work hard and continuing to do all you can to be successful. The doubts don't necessarily go away, but is it okay to lead in the domain of having doubts? I say yes.
Yeah, so doubts don't go away, and sit with those emotions and maybe moving these unspoken fears to just naming them
Yeah.
really helps.
Yeah. Self-confidence will grow authentically over time as they
Right.
keep getting more wins, right?
Right. So that's system level silence we're talking about. But inside families, the silence also collapses sometimes to just one relationship, right? The parent and child are really trying to work together. And sometimes it just doesn't work. You get in all these emotions, like you were talking, the grandfather and the father succession. Some of those patterns just play out, and then history wins or emotions come over. And sometimes some of these next gens have also described of how the parent still feels you're the child in the room, and they crave for that autonomy, they crave for belonging. So there's a lot of work to be done there. And you've coached so many next gens in this position. What has really helped them find their own rhythm or to work cordially, having this both family mindset and the business mindset?
Well, the thread I'm going to pick up in your great question, Divya, is the thread regarding the parents always see the kid as the kid. And I'm going to share another story with a client that I'm working with right now. This is actually a father-daughter transition. but it involves the mom as well. And when I first met the daughter, she had successfully purchased her father's business. She was the 100% owner of the business. And the father still worked in the business. Her mother had started working in the front office as well. And she came to me complaining, like really vigilantly complaining that every time she talks to her mother, like they get into a screaming match. And I said, so give me an example of how you communicate. And she said, well, like the other day, such and such went wrong. So I would, Mom, this went wrong. And I said, can I just pause you for a second? Yeah. I said, what I heard is a whiny kid. How does that land? And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, it sounds like you're going to your mom like you're a kid. You're not going to if the same problem happened and you were talking to one of your employees that's not a family member, how would you communicate? And she said, I would have said blah, blah, blah. And I said, why are you communicating differently with your mom? Because your mom's responding like a mom. You need to do this. You need to do this. She's kind of going, you're approaching her as a kid and she's responding like a mom. What if you approached her like a coworker, a colleague, peer? And so she tried it and she said, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. But everything has changed overnight because I'm now communicating with my mom like a colleague at work. And I mean, of course, there's warmth and connection because she's the mom. And so the coaching relationship ended. She was flourishing. And then recently, this is like 3 years later, they came back to me and now they want me to work with mom, dad, and daughter, this time all three of them, because they're going to be bringing in a new leader into the organization. They want to create good dynamics. So as I spoke with the parents wouldn't let the daughter take on any of the administrative responsibilities or any of the other kind of primary responsibilities of the business other than the core service of the business. Mm-hmm. And it's because the daughter had been recovering from some medical setbacks and the parents were really trying to protect the daughter from any additional responsibilities. And so I made the comment, it sounds like every time she tries to spread her wings, she feels like you're clipping them. How does that land? And they were like, I don't know. I'm not sure. And then a couple days later, the dad said, Cathy, I have been overparenting my 42-year-old daughter. I am done overparenting. I am 74 years old and I want out of this business. I want to start taking more vacation. And so I am now going to put together a booklet of all the things that she needs to take responsibility for. And we're going to transfer that responsibility to her. And then the mom did the same thing. So what was happening is the parents were still treating her like a kid, right? So in the first coaching round, I worked with the daughter to grow up, to show up more maturely with her parents. With the second time around, I'm inviting the parents to actually treat the daughter like an adult and not like a kid. And it seems to be working as well. So I'm really pleased that it's going as well as it is. And then the last thing I'll just pick up on is you've done a really nice job of highlighting in your questions the structure that comes from logic and the feeling that comes from emotion, and how so much of the structure is in place for succession and you've got all the right policies and all the governance and all the good stuff in place. But what really needs the attention is the emotional domain, because in that succession paradigm, if you're not addressing both the love and the logic, or the structure and the emotions, you're setting yourself up for a fraught transition. And the emotional stuff is uncomfortable. People don't like to do the emotional stuff. It's just emotional. And who wants to deal with emotion? This is a business. But in the family domain in particular, to not consider the emotional needs of all the people, leading gen, rising gen, non-family executives, is at risk of doing a disservice to the family and to the business. And it's why I wrote Hug of War. It's because, as you mentioned, the book really does highlight, I'll even pull it up here, it's how to lead a family business with both love and logic, right? Both love and logic. And it highlights the need for both opposites, both poles of a polarity, to be supported in order for the family and the business to thrive.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And what I saw you do there was lovely. You described the family's questions or dilemmas about wearing the family hat as well as the business hat, right? The family mindset and the business mindset. Could you tell me a little more about this?
Yeah, sure. Yes. One of my very first clients was a man I had never met. I was invited to sit outside his office and I heard this bellowing coming from inside and I thought, good grief, I'm not sure I want to work with this person, but he came out and he couldn't have been nicer. He brought me into his office and I said, well, what brings you to coaching? And he said, I am a serial entrepreneur. I have successfully started and exited 8 businesses. This is my 9th and I am ripping my hair out. I have not raised my voice in 30 years and now I'm yelling all the time. I don't know what's going on. I say, well, tell me more. And he said his wife pointed out that for the first time, he's actually working with family. He had started the business for his daughter because his daughter had been in and out of rehab. She'd had a substance abuse issue. And so he wanted to have something for her to carry forward after he's gone. But she was not performing well in the business and he was getting really frustrated. She also had a partner in the business and her partner was even worse. And he worked in sales. And so the dad had the data to prove it. But they had a daughter, his granddaughter, and he was terrified that if he let them go, they would never get to replicate their salary because he was overpaying them. And that would mean they'd have to leave town. And if they left town, that would cause problems in his marriage because his wife babysat the granddaughter every single day, right? So his business mindset, which was driven by profits and competition and meritocracy, the logic brain said he needs to go or they need to go. But his family mindset, driven by love, which values fairness and sharing and unconditional belonging, said something very different. I need to give them a raise and make sure they're safe and protected. 2 completely opposite right answers to the same question, right? And that is a classic polarity where you've got 2 right answers that are in utter opposition with each other. And that's what got me into this work of polarities in family businesses. It's the recognition that you've got 2 competing mindsets that are not always aligned. In fact, they're more often in competition. And it's uniquely present in a family business. It doesn't happen in other businesses. There's no such thing as a family business or as a family need outside of a family business, right? So that was really the genesis of the book.
Yeah, having those minds, two different mindsets play at one time, make it even more complex, right?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but if I may add, in my opening story, I talked about how my father was a spender and I'm a saver. My father is disruptor and I'm a stabilizer. My father's command and control. So those are all leadership polarities, right?
Right.
2, and both are legit. You need to have the ability to do both given the right context, right?
Yeah.
So bold and humble is one. My father's very bold. I became overly humble to a fault, in a problematic way. Those are all classic leadership polarities, and you need the ability to do both. As a person who identifies as humble, I have had to learn how to be bold in promoting my book, right? Like I can't just write a book and go, I wrote a
Right.
I have learned to develop more boldness in my communication in service to my long-term goals.
Yeah. And as you were talking of the polarities, right? Polarities are not something to be solved, like you say, and they exist. And sometimes maybe the founding generation or the next gen or the rising gen almost wants to think of this as we need to use the business mindset or we need to use the family mindset. I'm also coming from the space of after having done a lot of interviews, one of the family member who was probably in the 4th generation said, we started taking a lot of decisions thinking of the family. And I think we shouldn't have. We should have thought of business. We should have thought of profitability. So they're these 2 competing parameters and people don't know what to do justice to. And you're always thinking it's either this or that. So could you tell us how one can use this polarity framework to think through what we are facing?
Absolutely. I'm going to give 2 examples. The first one very short and the second one a little bit longer. The first example is the classic tension in family business succession with tradition and innovation. It's so common that the leading generation values tradition. This is how we're successful, right? And the rising generation wants to come in with innovation. And that threatens the leading generation because the leading generation is like, if we take chances on innovating, maybe this business is going to go under. I'm not sure I'm ready to take a chance on that. Rising generation is like, I've got 4 decades ahead of me. I want to take some chances. I'm going to roll the dice and see what happens. Let's throw money into AI and see what we can get. And that is such a normal and natural tension that creates so much conflict because until you hold tradition and innovation as a both and, as a polarity where both need to be present, you're putting force against force and going nowhere because one generation sees the upside of tradition and the overuse of innovation, and the other side sees the upsides of innovation and the overuse of tradition. So what they see is half the picture. Like I only saw half the picture with my father. In that particular conflict, typically you pick sides, right? And you're only seeing half the picture. And then you start to solicit family members to be on your side, right? Now you've got the whole family in conflict going like this with each other because they're both right. It is both right to invest in innovative concepts. It is also right to honor the tradition. And so the question can change from should we do what we've always done and follow tradition, or should we innovate too? How do we honor this beautiful heritage and innovate to stay relevant for the future? It's a both and. The second example is actually very specific to what you talked about with wealth transfer. There's an enormous amount of money transferring between generations. And it's in the process right now. And the big thing at the leading generation level, once you've designed your estate plan, is should we be transparent or private with our children? Or should we reveal or conceal the estate plan? And there's legitimate arguments in favor of both. On the reveal side, you've got a chance to help your children prepare for the future. You've got a chance to get their input in the design of the plan. There's a huge learning curve in wealth dynamics. And so the earlier you can learn it, the better, because it can be overwhelming. On the other side, the benefits of keeping it hidden or being less transparent, being more private, is that you don't have to defend your decisions. You can do what you want. You don't run the risk of, this is the big common one. If I tell my children what they're going to inherit, they're going to sit on easy street. They're not going to work. They're just going to float and wait for their money to come in. And gosh darn it, I didn't raise entitled children. I worked hard all my life, blah, 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 right? It's the fear of entitlement that comes from inherited wealth, which I think, I'm not a psychologist, but my personal opinion is that sort of entitlement gets formed at very early ages. If your kids aren't entitled by the time they're teenagers, they're probably not going to become entitled. They're probably going to continue to work hard and develop their own identity and still continue to thrive. So what will happen is, let's assume that the leading generation is young and their kids are 5, 7, and 9. They might start to hold the tension between transparency and privacy by having family meetings that talk about family values. Maybe a decade later, when the kids are 15, 17, and 19, they start talking about what's a trust, what's a grantor, what's a beneficiary, what are terms of a trust, some of the relevant language that's the learning curve piece of that. And then a little bit later, they start talking about the dollar amounts and the conditions under which distributions are made and those kinds of things that are specific to the trusts, so that you're holding the tension between these opposites in a way that's relevant for the current context. As you said beautifully, there is no right answer to a polarity. You can't solve it. So what you're doing is you're constantly revisiting the tension between the two and managing it in service to your aspirations, your higher purpose in the moment. And that context shifts over time. So as the context changes, the way you hold that tension can change as well.
That's a beautiful example. It really highlights very well of how the system is changing and how you sort of scaffold your answer, right? If I can say that. You're not looking at it as like, oh, if I do this, everything is going to turn out this way, but looking at that dynamic change in the system, looking at adults who are changing as well. So thank you for sharing that. Cathy, so we were talking about how there is so much complexity when you're dealing with family businesses. And at that, I want to ask you, it's inevitable that there are going to be conflicts, right? With just humans. And you can only imagine what it's like when you bring in the family mindset and the business mindset, and you're spending so much time together. In your book, you really write about these two kinds of conflicts. And I just want you to elaborate a little bit for our next gens and family business leaders here.
I'd be delighted to, Divya. Yes, I talk about the distinction between task conflict and relationship conflict. And I want to start by giving credit where credit is due. That came from Adam Grant's book, Think Again. And I actually think he borrowed it from someone else. But it was such a great distinction in conflict. I thought it was incredibly important and relevant for the family business domain, because so many of the family businesses that I work with, and let's be honest, I started most of my work in the Midwest, although now I serve a global audience. There's still, most people are avoiding conflict. And it's because they don't want conflict in the family domain, right? It's just the family rules are you're supposed to be in harmony. And the reality is we're not in harmony with our family members. And so we brush things under the rug for fear of stirring up disharmony that we don't want to have to deal with. And what I love about this distinction between task conflict and relationship conflict is that it highlights the importance of having constructive conflict. And that's task conflict. That's engaging on the idea. This is when we're debating the best ideas. We're really wrestling things down. He describes Orville and Wilbur Wright, and they were the inventors of the first airplane. And they are notoriously famous for having these knockdown, drag out task conflict fights. It was never personal, right?
Right.
Relationship conflict is when your ego is on the line and you're defending your ego in order to prove yourself right. It's very disruptive. The research has shown that if you give teams a challenge and they engage in task conflict, their outcomes are far better than the teams who engage in relationship conflict. So there's data that supports the destructive nature of relationship conflict and the incredibly valuable outcomes that come from task conflict. It's a challenge to learn how to engage in proper task conflict, right? And if we are pathologically conflict avoidant, any kind of conflict feels uncomfortable. But you can learn, you can develop the skills to engage in constructive task conflict in service to getting the best ideas. And you can design ways to mitigate relationship conflict to the best that you can. And then when it's present, then you actually work through the conflict. This was a really hard one for me because I was pathologically conflict avoidant and I hated the idea of engaging in any kind of conflict. But when I became a coach, I realized, good grief, I really need to build the skills. So I've developed a framework that helps me, and my clients seem to love it, to engage in constructive relationship, work through constructive relationship conflict. And what I have learned is that when you address relationship conflict, the other side of after the conflict has been addressed, the relationship more often than not grows stronger, which really was paradoxical. I thought it was going to actually damage the relationship, but to the contrary, working through the conflict built trust, strengthened the relationship. And so I'm a huge advocate for learning how to engage in good, healthy task conflict where the two people are on the same side of the table and the problem's on the other side of the table, and working through relationship conflict when two people are on opposite sides of the table.
Yeah, and that gives a beautiful framework for family business leaders to think of conflicts, right? Especially when they're engaging with each other. It sometimes seems like a disagreement in the family, but just helps to use these two lenses. And while you were talking of conflict, I know we might have some audience from India as well. I just want to bring in that cultural nuance here. The way Westerners see conflict versus how Eastern cultures see conflict is very different. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I do have some experience with Indian culture, and more on the personal side than on the professional side. India is a really big place, big country with an enormous number of subcultures within it. So it's not like there's one monolithic Indian culture. There's also massive differences between, the urban big city Indian experience and the more rural Indian experience. So I hesitate to speak in generalities, but in my experience, there is a lot of conflict avoidance in the Indian culture as well. There were some people that I interviewed for the book who were really enlightening. There was one vivid conversation that I had that stood out for me. It was a young man who's lost his father when he was in his early 20s, and he just moved to save the business. And then all of a sudden, stopped showing up to work and kept sleeping in and couldn't figure out what was going on. But every time there was a crisis, he would be the hero and save. But when the crisis was over, he would just stop functioning. And after the interview, kind of courageously emailed him and I said, look, I'm not a psychologist, but you talked about how you couldn't get out of bed today. And I've read that can be a sign of depression. What do you think? And he said, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. And sure enough, he ended up finding a therapist, of course, 3 counties away, because he was in Indian culture. It's still shameful to have a need for a therapist, which I hope that changes over time. So that was such a vivid memory for me. And so there is a lot of shame in my experience with some of the Indian cultures. And of course, you've got so many religious backgrounds. In terms of East and West, you've got the Western orientation to me, and then the Eastern in general orientation to we. That collectivist versus individualist culture can be a tension as well. And there's so much about conforming, and this is what our culture does officially, but the cultural norms are so deeply ingrained in how we are and this is what we do and there's no deviation from this particular way of being, that can be really difficult to work with because you're taking all of these cues for who you are by this outside influence instead of finding the cues of who you are from within yourself. That can be really challenging. Whereas in the US, it's me, me, me. I am me and everyone do with, I'm the best way. And our American over focus on individualism is really problematic for us. And I would think it's sort of, as we talked about a polarity, any polarity taken to an extreme without its complement, you're guaranteed to get all the overuses or downsides of it. I think the Americans are in the downside of individualism. And many of the Eastern cultures, not all, but many of the Eastern cultures are in the overuse of collectivism, or the downsides, I should say, of collectivism, which is hyperconformity.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting the polarity there as well.
Right.
So much of a nuance there, and the diversity makes it all the more complex. Yeah, while we wrapping up, just want to take you through a round of rapid fire, if I may.
Sure. Bring it.
Let's see, where do we begin? Something that you're learning these days.
Oh gosh, what's really popping up for me is I just moved my mother into a retirement community, and I am learning, talk about identity change. She's 84 next month. She's confronting the reality that the life that she has lived as an independent woman is no longer available to her because her cognitive and physical skills have declined so much that she needs the support of a retirement community. And it's been tender to watch her grieve the life that she loved so much, and learn to find the joy in the new life that she has. So it's really been about witnessing what I'm just about 25 years behind, right? Because I'm 25 years younger than my mom.
For sharing that. There's so much in this human journey. We don't name it. So thank you. Thank you for that. What's something that you're unlearning?
Well, this is something I've been unlearning for a while. I'm the oldest of 5 children, and I have been the one that everyone turns to solve problems. And so I've been sort of overdoing it on behalf of all of my siblings. Anytime there's a problem, Cathy will fix it. Cathy will do it. And of course, I'm happy to do it. Like, I've got the skills. I'm the one happy to do it. But what I've learned is how valuable it is. I'm unlearning how to actually be with the discomfort of not having a right answer and letting my siblings stumble and figure it out in service to their growth and development and to me not burning myself out.
That's so deep. And I didn't want to, but it almost feels like a founding generation and all the struggles they go through.
Great analogy. Yeah.
One small practice that builds trust across generations.
Oh gosh, that's easy. That would be listening, active listening skills. And there's one active listening skill. Oh, I think this is the most underused skill on the planet, regardless of business or family. It's active listening. And the specific category of active listening that I'd like to highlight is paraphrasing. So when you're in a conversation with someone and you may not agree with what they have to say, it's really easy to start building your argument against it. And what I challenge people to do is before they respond, that they actually paraphrase what they heard. It's an incredibly powerful tool because when you paraphrase, the other person knows that you're listening and knows that they've been heard. Because if you paraphrase and you get it wrong, then they say, oh, let me just clarify one thing. If they paraphrase and get it right, then they're like, okay, Cathy really understood what I was saying, and now I'm willing to hear what she has to say. But until that grace of sharing it with the other person that you may not agree with them, but you understand their point of view, you can end up in a circle of chaos and going nowhere because you're just talking over each other when you're not actively listening. So if I were to have a magic wand, if I were to give everyone a magic wand, I would encourage them to pair, especially in conflict, especially in high stakes conversations, because it slows down the conversation and it creates a container that's large enough to hold the emotion. If you don't create that container and slow things down, the emotion explodes and it erupts, and then the old unproductive patterns just go right back to where they were. The best way to undo a pattern, active listening.
Got it. Active listening and paraphrase. And lastly, do you have any advice for the founding gen or the next gen or anyone in family business?
The thing that I would like to, and it would be the same advice for both, is acknowledge the complexity that you're in. You're in an incredibly complex intellectual, emotional environment, and give yourself some grace. These are not easy transitions. These are not easy times. Succession is an incredibly fraught time. All the power dynamics get renegotiated. All the anxiety gets stirred up, and it takes a while for it to resettle. So take a deep breath and acknowledge that these are really tough times, but you're going to make it through. You have to. Time keeps on ticking, right?
That's lovely advice. The time keeps on ticking, and do what you need to. Thank you so much, Cathy. It was lovely having you here today.
It's a pleasure.
Really great insights and a thoughtful discussion. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on The Human Variable. I hope something in this conversation has helped you see yourself or your relationships with a little more clarity or maybe even compassion. The Human Variable is an ongoing exploration of what it means to be human across different contexts and inner worlds. If there's a human pattern you're curious about or something you're noticing in your own life, tell me. It might shape a future episode or even a future series. Keep learning, stay tuned, and take good care of yourself. I'll see you next time. This is your host, Divya.